All right, greetings everyone. My name is Joe Brito. I'm a career navigator with the Technology Metro Area Pathways Program, or TechMAP for short, here at Montgomery College. Today I'll be leading you through a presentation called Secure the Bag: Keys to a Successful Job Interview. During today's presentation, there's a couple items that I hope to cover. Number one, how to actually prepare for a job interview. This section will include tips and tricks on maximizing your performance before you even get to the interview to ensure that you're going to be successful. In the current environment that we're at, virtual interviews have become increasingly popular. As a result, we'll spend a little bit of time there touching on factors that pertain to virtual interviews and how you can get prepared for them. Number three, understanding behavioral-based interview questions. These are also becoming extremely popular across several different industries, including information technology. Chances are, if you've interviewed recently or you've interviewed a lot, you've come across some of these questions. I'll talk a little bit more about how to respond to these questions, including leveraging the STAR interview method that you need to be familiar with. Number four is mastering technical interview questions. So everything that we do here in TechMap naturally is geared towards information technology. Interviewing is no different. If you want to land a cybersecurity, a software development, any sort of information technology or computer science role, you have to be familiar with technical questions and how to answer them. During the mock interviews that we host as part of the TechMap program, you'll have a further opportunity to practice some of these areas. But hopefully this presentation will give you just a foundational knowledge into technical questions and how to answer them. Number five, the importance of following up. A lot of people think that once you have an amazing interview, that's it. It's not. I can assure you, following up is just as important as having a killer interview. And I'll explain a little bit more why that is and what you can do to follow up after your interview. And then lastly, we'll just discuss some next steps and some resources that you can utilize to become a top tier interviewer. All right, that's about it in terms of the agenda. Before we dive in, let's just get started with watching a quick video called The Good, the Bad, and the Hired.
Where do I see myself in 5 years? Good question. To quote the renowned scholar 50 Cent, I plan to get rich or die trying.
What would you say your greatest achievement is?
I began my last job joining a failing team, and so was commended on my leadership in turning that around. The only thing was I was 8, and the other competitors were 10 or 11. So to come third was a real achievement, particularly as I'd never even seen a conker before. The next year, still, to be recognised at an industry awards gala was a surprise, but a nice surprise. Apparently, it had been in there for 5 years. My granny keeps it in a jar on top of her mantelpiece.
Can I inquire about your last role? Why did you leave?
Why? What have you heard? Of course, and I'll be completely honest with you, I didn't feel the job was a good fit for my aspirations, and I wanted to focus on finding a position that I could really make my own, and I believe that this is that role. What part of no comment don't you understand?
What would you say your biggest weakness is?
Delegation. I like things done right, and so I often end up taking on too much by myself.
I know how that feels. What would you say your biggest weakness is?
Delegation. I like things done right, so I often end up taking too much on myself.
All right, great video to start us off. Obviously, that's a little bit of an exaggerated version, right? But there are still some foundational truths to that. You know, the differences between the two interviews. One person showed up, had great posture. Their top button, if you noticed, was buttoned up, the tie all the way to the top as well. They had shaved and they were ready, they were prepared, they were professional during the interview, versus the other interviewer, the exaggerated example of what not to do. But as you could see here, it's sometimes the small things, right, surrounding communication, professionalism, and preparation that make the biggest difference when it comes to interviewing. So that's a great segue into how to prepare for an interview. All right. So on this slide and the next one, I'm just going to share some crucial tips on how you can prepare for job interviews. The first thing that I would say is that it's important to always review the job description thoroughly. Take time to understand the responsibilities, the qualifications, and the requirements. During the interview, this will actually help you tailor your approach and your responses during the interview. While you're doing that, I encourage you just to identify some of the key competencies and the skills required within the job description. Look beyond the obvious ones and really try and focus in on the core abilities that will help make you a valuable asset to that particular team. For example, if let's just say you are looking for a position in cybersecurity, right? Some of the key competencies and skills required may not necessarily be that which are explicitly called out on the job description. You may be able to take a look and parse through the information and determine yourself that, okay, well, in cybersecurity, some of the soft skills that I may need, an analytical mind or the ability to think and analytically. I may need some problem solving skills. I may have to interact with a lot of stakeholders as part of my job duties. And so I need to be a good communicator across various different levels and cultures. And so those are some of the things through research and through reviewing the job description that you'll be able to start identifying. The next step, number 3, is matching your skills to the job requirements after realizing, okay, this is what this company ultimately wants. Once you've identified the essential skills, match them with your own experiences and strengths, and be ready to showcase your abilities and how they align perfectly with what the employer needs. Next to that, right, is as you start to match your skills, prior to the interview, you want to start preparing examples to showcase your abilities. With any claim that you make in an interview, you always want to try and back it up with a concrete example. So I encourage you just to think about stories or situations from previous work experiences, maybe college or extracurricular activities within college or within the technical realm that you can call on and deliver a captivating story, if they ask you about that particular area during the interview. Next up, let's research the company's values, mission, and culture. A lot of times this is something that is frequently overlooked, and I can't stress enough that this is extremely important to be able to make a positive impression on a company. By researching their information ahead of time, you are showing that you are genuinely interested in this particular company. And it's a benefit to you as well, too, because if through researching the company, you learn a little bit more about their core values, whether or not they've been in the news recently, you can start to see if any of those core values, if any of those beliefs, if the way the company conducts itself is a good fit for you. An interview is always a two-way street. Are you a good fit for the company? Is the company a good fit for you? Doing research ahead of time is something which I strongly recommend, because if you accept the role, the goal is that you're going to be there for a decent chunk of time, right? And you want it to be a good fit for you as well. All right. Lastly on this slide is do a mock interview. An interview, or interviewing rather, is like a muscle. The more you work that muscle out, the stronger it becomes, the more confident you become, the more comfortable you become. And so doing the mock interview is a necessary and recommended step as part of that growth process. You'll have the opportunity to do several here within TechMAP. We'll share some more resources as well as on how you can do a mock interview on your own time later in these slides. But strongly encourage you to do a mock interview with a friend, a family member, your career navigator, or even an industry professional to start gaining some confidence before the real interview shows up in a couple of weeks or months' time. All right, let's continue with preparing for a job interview. So, practicing your handshake. Again, something that people frequently kind of skip over, but nonetheless something that is important. When you show up to an in-person interview, you're meeting folks for the first time, you want to make sure that you have a firm handshake. A firm handshake speaks volumes about your confidence and your professionalism. And it's just typical that, you should have a firm handshake in a business setting. Now, there is a balance to this. You don't want to show up and be so firm that you're breaking bones or pulling their arm out of their socket. But you don't want to have a soft handshake either. It has to strike that right balance between soft and too hard, and having a nice firm handshake is the way to go. So I encourage you just to practice with friends and family. Again, even those folks within the TechMAP, your classmates, so that you could start working on practicing your handshake ahead of the interview. Next thing is being mindful of your body language. We kind of just saw this in the video a couple minutes ago, where one of the interviewers was slouched back, whereas one had better body language, where they were upright, they were looking into the other person's eyes. All of these things, they convey a lot more than you think during the interview. So being able to maintain eye contact, being able to sit up straight and avoiding fidgeting are all things that you just want to be mindful of and practice in preparation for your job interview. The next thing is dress appropriately. When in doubt, research the company's dress code, talk to people who may work for the company to see what you should wear for the interview, to see what is typically common if you were to work for that company in terms of what you have to go to the office in. And, when in doubt, if you can't find anything, just show out, really, right? Like, dress the part, dress for the job that you want, not for the job that you have. And again, when in doubt, that's business formal attire showing up to an interview. The next thing is to plan your route in advance. How many times have we been invited to an event, are getting ready to go somewhere, maybe it's a road trip, and we fail to plan our route in advance. And it leads to traffic, construction, multiple stops, us being late, having to be rerouted. I'm pretty sure anybody listening may have had an experience like this. I could tell you planning your route in advance for a job interview may save you a lot of time and a lot of hassle. And it's just a good, positive, best practice that you can begin to implement by plugging it into your GPS, figuring out what the best route is, what time you have to leave, and putting some buffer time in there to allow for parking, walking to the office, finding a particular room, and still showing up at least 10 to 15 minutes early. That ties into my next point, right? Arriving early. There's a saying, right? To be on time is to be late, and to be late is to be super late. You should be neither. You should always strive to be early. And typically when I show up for an interview, I like to be there at least 10 to 20 minutes early, no more or no less, but typically that time frame is going to make a positive impression on your interviewer and your hiring managers, because it shows them that you are punctual. Lastly, bring your resume. A lot of people forget about this one. They sometimes assume that their resume, and they're not wrong by assuming this, right? If I am a recruiter, I'm going to make sure that my hiring managers do have the resumes for various candidates if that candidate is coming in to interview with us. However, you never know. People's printers may be down, they may be in between interviews, and they are kind of stretched thin. They may have forgot to print your particular resume. You may have made updates to your resume since the time that you submitted the application. Whatever the case, I encourage you to bring just a couple extra copies of your resume, even your professional portfolio, and a notepad and pen to every single interview that you show up for. This shows that you are prepared. This shows that you are resourceful. This shows that you are organized. And during the interview, it allows you to take down notes as people who are speaking to you. That shows that you have a genuine interest in what they're saying. And I guarantee you, it is only going to make a positive impression on that interview team. So hopefully all of those made sense. That is how to prepare for a job interview. Now we're going to switch gears into actually mastering a virtual interview. As I said previously, with where the world is at, with technology advances, with globalization, even with the recent COVID-19 pandemic, how many times have we logged onto a Zoom meeting, a Teams meeting, or another platform to meet with colleagues, to meet with friends, family? Interviews are no different to that. So virtual job interviews are growing in demand and becoming increasingly common. So I'm just going to provide a few best practices on how you can prepare for a successful virtual interview. First things first, right? Test your technology in advance. You want to, when you receive the invitation for a job interview, make sure that you have whatever platform it is that they're conducting the interview on. If it's WebEx, download WebEx. If it's Teams or Zoom, make sure you have Zoom. In addition to that, you want to make sure that you have the necessary equipment. Does your laptop camera work? Does your webcam work? Do you have a strong internet connection? Is your microphone working properly? All of these things are extremely important, because when you show up for the interview early, you want to have mitigated any sort of technical glitch or error ahead of time so that you can just focus in on the interview. Next, choose a suitable environment. For this is also very important. There have been times, even in a past life for me, when I worked as a recruiter, where I have been interviewing candidates and they have a whole bunch of background noise. They have horrible lighting and you can't see them, right? Or it's just not been a clutter-free space. Like they have a lot going on. All of this serves as a distraction to you and to the recruiter or the hiring manager, whomever you're interviewing with. Really, it's not conducive. And so you want to choose a suitable environment, which is clean, quiet, which has good lighting, which has good internet connection, and some place where you could just focus in without distractions on the interview. The next tip is dress professionally. You heard this when it came to the in-person interview. Listen, the virtual job interview is no different. We have all been guilty in the virtual environment, if you worked hybrid or remotely, of maybe having a blazer, a dress shirt and tie, or the equivalent for an interview or for a meeting, but maybe you're wearing shorts on the bottom, right? I still encourage you to dress how you would for an in-person interview, for a virtual job interview as well too. What happens if there's a distraction in the room or somebody accidentally walks in and now you have to stand up and go close the door or turn the light back on or address something in the room? You don't want to be caught in a suit and shorts, okay? You want to make sure that you dress the part for a virtual job interview in the same way that you would for an in-person job interview. And again, when in doubt, that's business formal attire. Again, a lot of this may be repetitive to preparing for an in-person interview, but it is important to voice over. sometimes in a virtual environment, we kind of slack, we get comfortable, but we can't afford to. If we really want that job, we need to make sure we do everything that we can to prepare for it and to kill it, right? So the next thing is just maintaining good eye contact and body language. Again, sitting up straight, avoiding fidgeting, and then just trying your best to maintain contact with the person who you're speaking with. All right. Lastly, showcase your digital communication skills. So be clear and concise in your responses. Avoid using too much, technical jargon unless it's appropriate or required for that particular interview. And just maintaining effective communication is vital in remote work environments. So being articulate and well-spoken and leaving a positive first impression during your interview. This also ties into the first point, right? Testing your technology in advance. That showcases your digital communication skills because it shows them that if they do hire you for this role and you have to work remote or work from home, that they can trust you to do so without having serious glitches or internet issues, that you're able to facilitate a meeting or a presentation without your screen, dropping off or something significant happening. So that's mastering virtual job interviews. All right, let's take a breath and switch gears for a second. So we've spoke about how to prepare for the job interview. The next thing we want to touch on is understanding behavioral-based interview questions. As I said, these, exist industry to industry, and they're becoming increasingly common. So you've probably heard of these. If you haven't, this would be a good introduction. If you have, like I said, this will be a good refresher for you. So let's start with what are they? What are behavioral questions? Well, they are a type of interview technique that is typically used to assess a candidate's past behavior and performance in various different situations. Really, the underlying principle is that past behavior is a good predictor of future behavior. Instead of a hiring team asking you hypothetical questions about how you may act in a particular situation, behavioral-based interview questions allow them to solicit specific examples of how a candidate has handled the same or a similar situation in a past professional environment. So normally, how can you identify a behavioral-based interview question? Normally, they're going to begin with phrases like, tell me about a time when X. Give me an example of Y. Describe a situation where Z. If you hear any combination of those, it's likely that it's going to be a behavioral-based interview question. The candidate's responses to these questions help the hiring team just to gain insights into their candidate skills, abilities, and even sustainability for the role. Typically, behavioral questions are going to focus on soft skills such as problem solving, adaptability, critical thinking, teamwork, conflict resolution, etc. And I'll share with you, just a couple of example questions that you may see. So tell me about a time when you had to deal with a difficult coworker. How did you handle the situation? All right. Please give me an example where you faced a tight deadline when you were working on a project. How did you manage your time effectively to ensure successful completion of that project? Describe a situation when you had to make a significant decision with limited information. How did you approach it and what was the outcome? And I'll give you one more. Can you share an experience where you demonstrated strong leadership skills and influenced the team to achieve a common goal? All of these are great examples of behavioral-based interview questions that you may face during your next job interview. Let's talk a little bit more about how to respond to those questions, though. There are a few methodologies out there. Typically, STAR and CAR are the most popular ones. CAR stands for context, action, result. The one we're going to focus on today, however, is situation, task, action, or result, or the STAR method for short. So let's start with step number one, S, or situation. During this step, you will essentially just describe the context and the background to the situation that you encountered in reference to the question that the hiring team has asked you. Step two is task. You want to explain the specific task or challenge that you were facing in response to that particular situation, right? Now that you have set the scene, you provided the context, the task helps the hiring team to understand the challenge specifically that you were faced with within that context. Step number three is action, right? You want to describe the action that you personally took to address the situation or tackle the challenge. One mistake that candidates sometimes fall into is when responding to step number three, action, they say, we did this or we did that, or my team and I did this, and my team and I did that. That's actually wrong, right? The goal of the interview is not to interview your previous team, it's to interview you. And the hiring teams, they don't care about what your teammates did, they care about your particular role. And so to avoid a probing question after you've answered this, such as, hey, I heard you talk a lot about what your team did to address that particular challenge, but what did you specifically do? What was your role in it? Make sure you center the action, the step number three, around the actions that you specifically took to tackle that challenge. And then finally, the step number four, R, or result. You always want to share the outcomes or the results of your actions, as well as what you learned from this experience. Similar to when you're updating your resume, if you can include numbers, data, metrics to further provide a concrete example and illustrate your point, I encourage you to do that here as well too. Numbers help to get our point across. And let's just say, right, that you faced a situation where you improved the efficiency for said company and it led to an increase in sales by 20%. If I'm your recruiter and your hiring manager and I'm interviewing you and I listen to you and you said that you increased sales by 20%, okay, now I want you on my team specifically, right? Because I want my sales to increase 20% as well too. And so this is something whereby when you go back to how to prepare for a job interview, that you can start to leverage as you match your skills to the job description and you begin preparing examples for different questions that you may face. I strongly encourage you to practice and to study the STAR interview method so that you may become a pro at behavioral-based interview questions. All right, so over the next few slides, we're going to talk about some other typical interview questions. The first one that I want to cover is something that you have probably been asked 1,000 times if you've interviewed previously. And that question is, so tell me a little bit about yourself. This is typically a common open-ended interview question. It's normally going to be the first question that you're asked. And essentially, this just helps the interviewer or the hiring team just to better assess your communication skills. So here are some best practices to answering this particular question. First things first, you want to keep this concise. This is an open-ended question, so it's easy to kind of go on, but you want to keep your answer within 2 to 3 minutes, no longer than that, right? You want to make sure that your response is captivating but concise so that you still maintain the attention of your interviewer. This also is going to allow you to just focus on essential points without going too far off course. The next suggestion I have is just to focus on professional information. A lot of times when, we're asked, tell me a little bit about yourself, you may be tempted to be like, oh, well, yeah, thanks for asking. My hometown is X, Y, and Z. I have X amount of kids. I've been in, this particular field for a little while, but my passion is photography on the side. And I have 2 dogs and 17 cats. That's not the place, it's not the time or the place to go into your personal information. Once you've got the job and you're meeting your coworkers, that's when you can go into a little bit more information about yourself if you choose to share. During the interview, you want to focus solely on professional information. So you want to share details about your professional background, your skills and experiences relevant to the job that you're applying for. And again, you want to avoid sharing any personal or unrelated information unless it directly demonstrates key attributes that would benefit the role. The next thing you want to do is to structure your response. And again, doing a mock interview and practicing ahead of time in preparation for your job interview will help you do that. The more you practice this question, the better you're going to get. And being able to structure your response is a good way to go about practicing as well, too. You want to organize your answer to this question in three main parts. The first part is a brief introduction about yourself. Yeah, thank you for the question. As you know, my name is Joe. I graduated from X school. I have been in human resources and career development for 5 years now. And something to that effect, right? And then, after that, you want to talk a little bit more about your relevant work experience, right? So if you've been in the field, you could talk a little bit more about how you've been in this particular field for a set amount of years, doing this type of work, working on this type of project, working with these types of clients. That will cover step number 2, right? Your relevant work experience. For many of you listening to this, however, you may not have experience in information technology. And listen, that's okay. If you have examples from TechMAP where you've worked on different labs or different projects that relate to, what you may need in this role, I strongly encourage you to talk about your experience within TechMAP. If you are working towards a degree, if you have participated in extracurricular activities, anything that may relate to this particular role that you applied for, this would be a great opportunity to be able to talk a little bit more in depth about all of those respective areas as well too. Next, after that, right, you want to talk a little bit about what your career aspirations are or what you bring to the table. And, for my folks who may not have a whole lot of technical experience, this particular section is going to be really important for you, right? Because what is it that you bring to the table? You may have transferable skills from your previous career that may be a great fit in cyber or software development or data, and focus really on your soft skills. Hey, I'm a very hard worker. I have a strong work ethic. I have proven that time in and time out through previous jobs. One thing that I'm prepared to do is put in the work. Or, hey, I'm very adept at problem solving in previous roles. I was typically the go-to person for, my colleagues when they needed to troubleshoot an issue. I was typically serving as a subject matter expert within X capacity. And as a result, I'd be able to bring that same problem solving, critical thinking skills to the table for your company. You want to consolidate this particular interview question just by, coming full circle with it, basically, and being holistic and ending the response with what you bring to the table and why you would be a good fit for this particular role. All right, let's move on to the next tip. You want to start with a strong opening. As I said, begin with a concise and impactful statement about yourself, such as your current job title or your years of experience within the industry. And further to that, as you go on, you want to make sure that you highlight your achievements as well. So don't be afraid to discuss your accomplishments, how you've added value to your previous roles, and be sure to use specific examples. And like I said before, try and quantify your achievements wherever possible. I successfully led a team of 10 to 15 people. I increased sales by 20%, so on and so forth. Again, practice makes perfect. So this being an important question that you're likely to face during almost every job interview that you have, I strongly encourage you to begin practicing this one beforehand. Some other typical interview questions may include, hey, so on, hey, Sarah, what are your strengths and weaknesses? When the hiring team asks you this particular question, essentially they want to understand your self-awareness, how well you match the requirements of the job, and when discussing your strengths, can you highlight the skills that align with the job description? For weaknesses, I encourage you to mention an area where you're working to improve or to overcome that weakness, and just emphasize those things that you are doing. Let's just say, for example, your particular weakness may be Microsoft Excel, or it could be technical writing, and you may cite that as a weakness, but you may also say, although this is my weakness, for the past 6 months, I have been part of a boot camp, or I've been taking a local class at the community college whereby I am studying this and I'm working towards a certification, or I have grown in proficiency since then. And I plan on continuing my learning in this area to make sure that, I am proficient in this particular area and it's no longer a weakness. This is showing that you're proactive, you're resourceful, and that honestly you're reliable. You're the type of person whereby if we hire you and you face a challenge, you're not going to run from it. You're going to go, headfirst into it and try and get over the curve. Next, why do you want to work here? This question essentially assesses your motivation and your interest in the company and the position. And this is why I was saying that researching the company beforehand is so important. If you research certain core values, their culture, their values, let's just say, their reputation, have they been in the news? You'll be able to successfully answer this question because you may find a couple of things from your research that may resonate with you. And as you'll be able to speak on why you would be a good cultural fit for them. Next, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Employers want to know if your long-term goals align with the company's vision. You want to show enthusiasm for growth within the company, first and foremost, and discuss how you plan on contributing and progressing throughout your career at the company. I would probably avoid, right, if you do have other aspirations that are separate from working for this company. That's not a bad thing, but I would probably avoid mentioning that during the interview, just keeping in mind that unfortunately it may be used against you, right? They want to, again, determine if you're going to be a good long-term fit for their company and if you're going to be around years to come, or if in 3 to 6 months you're going to be out the door because you have decided that you want to become an entrepreneur and really chase that entrepreneurial goal that you had cited in the interview. And so, similar to tell me about yourself, focus on professional answers here and tailor it to the job that you're applying for. Last but not least, right, do you have any questions? Again, in a previous life as a recruiter, I can't tell you how many people I have interviewed, and at the end of the interview, they don't have anything to ask. And this typically is seen as a red flag, because if, in the mind of the hiring team, it's not necessarily your mind or your intentions, but in the mind of the recruiter or the hiring team, we're spending an hour with you and we're assuming that you want this particular job. This is your golden opportunity to learn a little bit more about that job, or to learn a little bit more about me as the interviewer or the company as a whole. And you don't have any questions. And so my recommendation would be to prepare at least 3 to 5 questions across various topics that you can ask during the interviewer. Again, this is going to show them that you're engaged and excited about the role. It also is going to show preparation, the fact that you took the time to prepare some interview questions prior to coming in. And you always want to be sensitive and gauge this, right? If you have a 30-minute interview and 5 minutes is left and you're asking questions, You may only have time for 1 or 2 questions. You want to always be respectful to the interviewer's time, because chances are they may have another interview after you. If it's a 60-minute interview and your interview ends 45 minutes in, you may be able to ask all 5 of your questions. Just play it by ear, be respectful of time, but make sure you have enough interview questions planned. Prioritize which ones are the most important, and just make sure you kind of play it by ear to be able to address those interview questions during the interview. All right, so hopefully all of that is making sense. I want to go ahead and touch a little bit on mastering technical interview questions. Good news, we are almost at the end, so stay tuned for a little bit longer. But again, right, like I said, everything that we do within TechMAP is going to be geared and tailored towards information technology. Interviewing is no different. Over the course of your time in the IT field, when you're interviewing for jobs, you're going to be asked a whole bunch of technical interview questions. These may be challenging at first, but with the right approach and preparation, you can definitely increase your chances of success. Here are just a couple of tips to understand those technical interview questions and to be able to master them as well. Number 1 is understanding the basics thoroughly. Before diving into any complex topics, you just want to make sure you have a strong foundations in the basics of information technology and your particular subset of information technology or computer science, whether that is software development, data analytics, cloud technologies, networking, or cybersecurity, right? Now, this may be specific to a certain pathway, but if this applies to you, maybe you want to review key concepts about data structures or algorithms or operating systems or networking or databases. A lot of technical interviews are going to start with fundamental questions to gauge your core knowledge first, and they may go on to some more hands-on questions where you may have to describe how you would respond to a particular technical situation that you may be faced with on the job. Number 2, practice coding and problem solving. Technical interviews may often include coding challenges or problem solving exercises, like I said before. So you want to be wary of that, right? And prepare for it. So platforms such as LeetCode, HackerRank, or CodeSignal, and again, there are others, right? You could practice regularly on those platforms to prepare for these particular questions. Next, learn from real world scenarios. Understand how the technologies you've worked with apply in real world scenarios. Be ready to discuss your experiences and explain how you solve technical challenges on previous projects. Interviewers often value practical knowledge and the ability to apply it effectively. So let's just say you're going into cybersecurity. There have been a few notable breaches or security incidents in the history of cybersecurity. Even if you think back a couple of decades ago to the Equifax breach, where it affected millions of Americans and a whole bunch of sensitive information was leaked. You want to study real world scenarios like that, and what were the vulnerabilities in that particular incident? How did it happen? What did we learn from it? What progress has been made in the field since then? Different things like that you want to start becoming a little bit more proficient and aware in, as well as keeping up to date with current trends, which I'll cover a little bit later. Mock interviews and feedback. So again, with technical questions, this is going to be repetitive, but it's the same thing with how to prepare for a job interview. You want to make sure that you are conducting a mock interview, that you're receiving and soliciting feedback from your interviewer, and that you're working on improving going forward based off of the feedback that they provided. I strongly encourage you to take advantage of the mock interviews within TechMAP and to take it a step further and continue practicing with friends, family members, mentors, and industry professionals. Tip number 5, stay current with current industry trends. IT is ever evolving, right? We are in a period of globalization, rapid technology development, the introduction of artificial intelligence, and the technologies that we're working with today may be different 2 years from now. You want to stay up to date with industry trends and make sure that when you go into an interview, because you are up to date, you are able to speak on some of those new trends. This is going to show that you are prepared, that you're resourceful, and that you're invested in making sure that you can remain current and that you have a demonstrated commitment to continuous learning as well. So in conclusion, remember that technical interviews are not only about getting the correct answer, they're also about demonstrating your problem-solving skills, your thought process, and your ability to handle challenging situations. Practice makes perfect, so preparation is key, and that will allow you to go into these technical interviews with the confidence that you need to be a successful pro interviewer. All right, switching gears again, we're going to touch on the importance of following up. As I said, a lot of folks think that once they've had a successful interview, that is the be all end all, and I can assure you that it is not. Following up is, critically important, even just as important as well too. My suggestion is to send a thank you email, right? Within 48 hours after your interview to the hiring managers and the recruiter. You want to thank them for their time, talk a little bit more about why that particular time was beneficial to you. Maybe it was a question that they answered for you, something that they learned, something new about the company and the role that you learned and why it resonates with you. And you want to reinforce your interest and your enthusiasm to that particular role, and show that you are genuinely interested in the position, even after interviewing with them as well too. This is going to demonstrate to the hiring team that you're proactive, that you're committed, and that you're polite enough to send a thank you email as well too after your actual job interview. This is also going to help you stand out from other candidates. Like I said, when I worked as a recruiter, typically the candidates who sent a thank you email and who followed up afterwards, the hiring team really appreciated that, and it formed a very positive impression versus some of the other candidates who maybe they had a great interview, but after the interview was over, they demonstrated no enthusiasm for that particular role and they didn't follow up, right? So this is how you differentiate yourself from other candidates, just by simply going the extra mile, which, let's be honest with you, takes no more than 5 to 10 minutes to draft that thank you email to follow up. This is going to leave a positive, long-lasting impression on your interviewer. The importance of following up and sending that thank you email is also beneficial because it will allow you to address any outstanding questions or concerns that you may have, or even that the hiring team may have. Sometimes there may be lingering questions or reservations about your candidacy, and a follow-up message will allow you to address any of those issues, maybe clarify something during the interview that you may have said. It also shows that you are proactive in addressing potential concerns and willing to provide some additional information or examples if needed, if the hiring team needs that. And then lastly, following up allows you just to keep that conversation going, to make sure that you are living rent-free right in your recruiter's brain because you're following up. And don't get me wrong, there is a fine line between this. You don't want to follow up 10 times in 2 months, all right? Let's hope that you're not waiting 2 months for that job. However, typically what I would recommend is following up within 48 hours, 24 to 48 hours with a thank you email. And if you haven't been invited back, maybe within a 1 to 2 week period from the recruiter for a secondary interview, and you haven't heard anything, sending another follow-up email as well, just to check in on the status of your application, reinforcing your interest, and showcasing that you're prepared to answer any questions that may be needed if anything is lingering on their end. So similar to the handshake, right? There's a firm balance between it, and you want to make sure that you're not being overbearing while also being intentional about following up. All right, so let's go ahead and bring this to a close. For the next slide, I'm just going to talk a little bit more about next steps and resources for you. So the first thing that I've been harping on about, as you know, is conducting a mock interview. Listen, you're here in the TechMAP program now. We have career navigation available for you for a reason. You are going to have to interview. It's inevitable, right? And whether you are a pro interviewer or not, conducting a mock interview will allow you to refresh your knowledge, become more comfortable. And the mock interviews that we conduct are specific and tailored to the particular field that you're about to enter. You're going to do one during the class. However, we strongly encourage you to reach out to your mock interview, to your career navigator, prior to that mock interview that you're going to do in your class, to facilitate one with us, right? We're here to serve you and to help you. And so we hope to see some of you get on our calendar for mock interviews. The next thing that you want to do is to register for Big Interview. Big Interview is a platform that is available to Montgomery College students for free, okay? Again, I'm going to say that one more time, for free. And this is very simple to sign up on. When you receive this slide deck, you can simply click on any of these links here. And if you click on the Big Interview link, it will take you to a PDF document, which will detail the instructions for signing up. What is Big Interview? Big Interview is an online platform that you can use to practice your mock interviewing and your interviewing skills as a whole. You can tailor your questions to the particular job that you want. And this is something that you can do at your own pace, your own time, at your own leisure, right? You don't have to have another human sitting in front of you. You don't have to worry about getting on anyone's calendar. This is something that you can do at 9 o'clock at night if you wanted to get ready for an interview the next day. Number 3, check out this article that I have linked in here for more interview tips and tricks. And then lastly, I encourage you just to visit us on the TechMAP website, where you can learn a little bit more about our program, all of the resources that are available to you, the overarching goal of TechMAP, and where you could also track down information for your career navigators if needed, as well as other staff within the program. So that brings us to the end of today's presentation. If you stuck with me up to this point, I'd like to thank you, and hopefully this was a beneficial presentation for you. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I have my email here on this slide, and any member of our team, as I said, is here as a resource for you. So hopefully you enjoyed today's presentation. Thanks for your time, and take care.